This is around 2017 in spring or fall. I was 19 at the time and I live in Germany. Me and my friends used to hang out at a friend's basement, smoke the good stuff, and play video games or watch movies until late at night. My best friend at the time lived just a couple houses down the street from where I lived, and usually it was the two of us riding our bikes back home. There were two routes that we used to get home. One was through the city, or the other one, on the significantly shorter route through a small forest, maybe 1 kilometer, completely dark, but it was a proper forest road. That road made a 90-degree turn to cross some rails and a major unlit highway via a bridge. We only took that route when we were equipped with lights and in a group of at least 2 people because there were a lot of boars and you don't want to be on your own in case something happens. So one night, we set out to ride home, both quite stoned and maybe, a couple beers in, but not off the deep end. As we got close to that 90-degree turn where the road heads up to the bridge, my friend who was riding in front suddenly brakes because there was a relatively large tree laying across the road. We both took our bikes and lifted them over the tree and continued. Maybe 10 to 20 meters later, we suddenly spot a fire on the side right at the junction, where we had to make our turn, just the size of a small campfire. We both went a little slower as we saw the fire, and then when getting closer, we spotted about 6 or 7 people around the fire forming a semicircle, all facing us. All of them were wearing long white dresses or gowns with masks. Not Ku Klux like masks, but like a sailor's hat with veils. And a couple seconds went by, we were just staring at them, and I guess they were staring at us. Then one of them moved towards us and we started to sprint away toward the bridge on our bikes and didn't stop until we were on a well-lit road again. That's been the craziest stories among me or my friend ever since, but please, people, let's not meet again. Number 2. I grew up out in the wooded country in Illinois, on a short dead-end street around 10 miles from a town, and there were 7 houses in the area spread out around a 2.5-acre wood. It is, maybe large. There were no large wild animals. There aren't bears or similarly large animals in the region, and people didn't minder there or show up lost. Actually, lost folks or large animals wandering around never happened in the 20 or so years I lived there, so please keep that in mind. When I was a young girl in my early teens, I had a good guy friend a few years older than me who lived next door, Terry. Terry was allowed to go out with his friends much later than I was, and he would sometimes tromp over to my yard after getting home late and throw rocks from the gravel area outside at my window to chat. My bed was right next to my window. I'd open the window and we'd whisper stories and generally talk for a bit. My second-story window faced our backyard and his house was to the side. I could see his house from my window over the shrub trees and walking path to his driveway. I'd often know if he was out. The light was on over the side door entrance, or already home. Light was off. One day, during the summer, when my window was open, I heard a car in his driveway dropping him off. I was probably around 14 years old and it was around midnight. I heard Terry get out of his car and was talking to his friends. Soon his friends pulled away. I softly called out, as loud as I could without waking my parents, asking Terry to stop by and chat. He didn't respond as he probably didn't hear me. Then I came up with the not-so-brilliant idea to sneak outside and scare him. I'd spent many years in the woods and learning how to blend in and be silent. As kids, we'd often sneak around and scare each other. So I silently sneaked down from the second floor and out my back garage door, which led to our backyard below my window, which led to Terry's house off the side through our gravel area, then through a well-worn path through the woods that was about 25 feet long. My parents had put a gravel pit around the back of the house, probably because nothing much grew due to the shade of the oak trees. There were 14-inch oak rounds set out as an uneven stepping path in the gravel, and if you stepped off of the rounds, the crunch of gravel would give you away. I picked my way expertly and silently across the log rounds facing Terry's house. My eyes got accustomed to the dark and I didn't see him. Also at that time I heard the door of his house close and the light going off, signaling he went in, likely to bed. I waited a bit, as I thought I saw something move in the woods between our houses, but not on the path we'd always use. If you didn't use the path, there were wild rose and raspberry plants that all had thorns and were painful to walk through if you weren't careful, so I thought it was odd that he'd be in the woods, but maybe he just wanted to scare me like I was plotting to do to him. but I saw something human-sized and dark moving through the woods, slow and pausing every once in a while like me. It was coming closer and I definitely saw it, but it was strange in that it wasn't walking directly to my window to talk. Therefore, I hunched down and waited in silence, wondering if I could still startle him. I still thought it was Terry, and he saw me sneak out and he was trying to scare me. I watched the dark outline of a human figure moving, but then I would lose the sight of it in the foliage. It seemed to be stalking slowly and listening every few feet while hiding, so I whispered after losing patience one last time for Terry, but he didn't answer. I got bored of hiding and crouching, so I quietly tiptoed back to my garage door and went back inside, silently locking up as I went. I snuck back upstairs to my room above the area where I was just standing, and my window was open, and I definitely heard somebody or something walking around the yard. I whispered again for Terry on my window, but got no answer. Then I heard someone or something fall, and I heard a pretty loud grunt or moan at the window, well, right below my window. It wasn't enough to wake my parents, but definitely loud enough that I didn't mistake it, and it sent a shock of fear through me. If you aren't familiar with a window well, it's a semicircle hole connected to the house, dug out about 3 or 4 feet deep, and it's reinforced with metal. It allows a basement window to be put in below ground level, and the hole lets some natural light in. There is no way Terry would have fallen in our window well. We'd been playing hide and seek and many outdoor games for years since we were young around the whole neighborhood. We knew everybody's window wells and house footprints, as well as the paths in the woods like the back of our hands. The grunt sounded humanish and not like an animal. It also pulled itself out quietly without a lot of thrashing. That's when I realized this wasn't a fun game and someone or something was out there, and it wasn't Terry. I tried to look outside my window as best I could, but there was a screen on my windows to keep the bugs out, so I couldn't lean my hand out the window to see the next to the wall or a house directly below me. I then heard the crunch of rocks as whatever it was stepping in the noisy gravel was being loud. Again, Terry would know where the log rounds were and would not step in the gravel. He knew my parents were pretty strict, and he was as good as being quiet as I was. Whatever it was stopped, and I held my breath. I pretty much sat there with my face pressed against the screen 2 stories up for probably half an hour. It seemed like an hour, but I'm sure I did not have the patience back then to wait that long. Never heard it, him, or her leave, but I eventually grew tired and fell asleep on my bed that was next to the window. There are a few things I'm certain of. Number 1, it wasn't Terry. I asked him later, and he said that he went to bed that night when he got home. He would also have no reason to lie. Number 2, I'm pretty sure it wasn't one of our neighbors, and I can't think of any reason a person would be there. We had few neighbors, and only 2 other houses out of 7 had kids. Again, these 7 houses were spread out in 2.5 acres per home. And number 3, there weren't any big animals in the area. As wooded as the whole area was, we only had some deer, but they were hunted and didn't really come close to homes. Plus, our dog usually scared them away. So, stranger in the woods, let's not ever meet. Number 3. That night, I was hanging out with 3 friends, Sarah, Nick, and Mary. We were celebrating Nick's birthday at his place, which happened to have a hot tub in the backyard. After a couple hours and a couple too many beers, we jokingly suggested skinny dipping in the hot tub as some kind of birthday present. It would have probably stopped there if it wasn't for our drunkenness, and so we eventually did say, "F it, let's do it." Now for context, Nick's house was by a forest and was very isolated from neighbors. Adding to that, it was maybe past midnight, and anything past the Christmas lights of dubious quality that were spread around the yard was basically pitch black. Being scared losers, going out there without Nick's parents' home would have been unimaginable if it hadn't been for the wonders of inebriation. So semi-reluctantly, I followed my friends into the night with a towel on my shoulder. We reached the hot tub that was worryingly close to the edge of the woods, and we started stripping. Everything was fine for the next 30 minutes or so, apart from the occasional branch cracking. We were having fun, telling stories or rambling about stupid stuff, and fear quickly faded away. That was until a deafening shriek came from the darkness of the forest, lasting for about 5 seconds. It sounded like a human voice, but it almost didn't sound like a person. We all turned livid, became silent for what seemed like hours, and I even saw Nick lose his boner in a matter of seconds. We didn't dare try to look into the forest, except Mary, who just grew a pair of balls out of nowhere and picked up her phone to use the flashlight. We couldn't help but follow the light as she pointed it at the forest, who seemed unaffected by it, as if the darkness was swallowing it. Nothing. As we were about to stop looking, though, the void stared back at us. Mary shined her light far behind Sarah, and it reflected on a pair of eyes and a white form in the distance. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. We rushed out of the tub without even giving a single thought about gathering our clothes. Mary and I screamed. Apparently her balls had been blown to smithereens, and we all ran toward the back entrance as fast as possible. Nick immediately got a knife while we locked every door and window. We wanted to call Nick's parents or the police or anyone, but our phones were over by the forest where we'd left them. Seeing no other choice, Nick put his shoes on and made a run for it. He'd managed to get his phone, but he'd heard loud breathing coming from the forest, meaning whatever it was hadn't left. What followed were the shittiest 2 hours of my life. Nick got his parents to make their way home, handed us towels so we could finally cover ourselves, and we gathered in the basement where there were no windows. We spent most of the time in silence, waiting for something to happen. Half an hour in, we heard another shriek, more distant. Only this time, it was shortly followed by knocks on the door that couldn't possibly be Nick's parents. Sarah actually started crying, but thankfully it stopped after that. The parents arrived and allowed us to sleep in the basement for safety. They hadn't heard or seen anything, and we were pretty sure we just imagined stuff. We hardly slept, and once the morning came, we went out to get our stuff. The phones, keys, wallets were all there. The only things missing were Nick's shirt and Sarah and Mary's panties. I wasn't wearing any that night. So that left us with two possible scenarios. A weird pale-ass pervert spied on us in an isolated area deep in the woods, or whatever other creepy stuff roams in there just decided to spook us. Number 4. I posted this in Missing 411, and in my planning of my upcoming camping trips felt the urge to post it here. Mostly a copy and paste with an update on one of the family members. This may be a ramble of thoughts, but after recently stumbling on this sub, I finally felt a place I could offer something that my family and I experienced a few years ago that to this day gives me a shiver. I have been camping, solo backpacking, and hunting my whole life in Oregon, and felt comfortable in the woods and have a deep respect for nature. A few years ago, my wife, daughter, and 2 German shepherds went camping north of Mount Jefferson, Oregon. I have included the coordinates of our campsite, which we found to be the perfect setup for us and our 2 dogs who need the privacy since they're intimidating to other dog owners and can be loud when spooked. It was not an established campsite, just a nice horseshoe off a USFS road that had flat ground, full trees, and a fire pit. The first night, my daughter wanted to sleep by herself in a 2-man tent right next to ours. It was maybe 2 feet away from me and my wife's tent. We made the male German Shepherd sleep, Guts is his name, with her in the tent. The whole first night, neither my wife or I could sleep. We both heard footsteps, and they were heavy, not like typical forest critters scampering around the night. I was well armed because I was paranoid from reading recently before departing about a dad in California who was shot and killed in a tent next to his 2 infant daughters. Needless to say, both my wife and I had 2 pistols and my rifle with me. The dogs are great at detection, and that is why I felt my daughter could sleep alone, because Guts is completely fearless and nothing would lay a hand on her without a battle to the death. All in all, nothing but bad vibes, and loud footsteps occurred that night, which I ultimately decided was deer or maybe some elk. Day 2. Morning. We go for a walk down the road, and maybe 300 feet away see the circle area in the photos on the screen. I see an abandoned road where a rusted gate post, gate was missing, was covered in vegetation. Something of blue color caught my eye, and Guts immediately takes off running down this abandoned road. My heart begins to race because I think it's another family camping like us, and he's going to get himself shot or scare some innocent people to death, so I chase after him as fast as I can, and the rest follow. He stops after 20 feet into the road and me yelling his name, but I have covered just enough distance to see that there is nobody there and something is off about the sight. I yell, "Hello? Is anyone there? Sorry about the dog." I got no response. My curiosity gets the best of me, and I have to see what the site conditions were. As I get closer, I know something is wrong. It had all the necessities for a campsite, including a cooler, propane burner, tent, blankets, folding table, but every single item had been completely destroyed, smashed and torn from what appeared to be claw marks. We all walked around in circles, puzzled why anyone would leave all their camping gear behind, including an expensive REI tent. I figured, well, someone left in a hurry, and animals got to the rest as the only logical explanation. Still, the propane tank and cooler were flattened by something, and it certainly wasn't snowpack with tree coverage in that spot. As the afternoon rolls in, me and my daughter are playing bocce ball at the campsite, and my wife goes walking maybe 70 feet north to do her business. I do not have direct line of sight on her, but all of a sudden I see Guts make a mad dash straight toward her. Normally he would always be with me unless he is called over and she didn't call for him. His speed and focus caught my attention, and I knew something weird was happening, so I ran over there and my wife starts jogging at me, and I immediately draw my pistol. Guts has completely continued running into the forest another 100 feet before I call him, and he stopped. My other dog, Leah, who never misses the opportunity to be the pack leader, is not taking point. I've had her for now 7 years, and this was the first time in her life she refused to leave my daughter's side. She was full hair raised and attached to us at the hip. Again, anytime we hike or play, Leah's up front bossing everything in her path and pauses to look to see where we are and continues. I asked my wife what happened, and she said, "I was trying to pee and all of a sudden I felt all my hairs raise. I know someone was watching me, and then I saw Guts running toward me and I just got up to move toward you." We spent 10 minutes looking for signs of anything and saw no trails, broken branches, nothing to point to what and where something went. We decide we are spending one more night since it's too late to pack up and drive, but we'll all be in the big tent together. Before we go to bed, I put on a rope with makeshift coin alarm around the perimeter of our campsite. I used a mint can and some coins and keys from our truck and zip-tied it so anything hitting the rope gave a little jingle. Very unsophisticated, but it put my wife at ease. As I go to tie the last corner off at a tree near our tent, our third mystery item unveils itself. It looks like someone has done the same exact thing I had done, with a rope that was so old and brown I didn't see it at first. It was broken and only a few pieces remained, but sure enough it was tied at roughly the same height, around 8 to 10 inches off the ground, and even had a few rusted washers on it. I immediately felt someone had stayed here before and put the same makeshift warning system on the same tree I am, maybe 10 to 15 years ago based on the condition of the rope. Perhaps my paranoia has now reached a new height, but I had to make sure the girls felt we are safe, and at the same time the only thing I could think of was when the evening came around, I made them sit in the truck and I fired a clip of my .45 into the dirt as a signal to whatever was out there that we are armed. I reassured the girls that anybody listening to us now knows that we have 2 wolves and are armed, and we are too risky of a target so we can sleep safely. That night we heard no footsteps and the dogs never perked up or barked. We left early the next morning. Fast forward to today, and I watched the Amazon Missing 411 Hunted documentary, and I noticed the cluster smack dab close to where we camped that weekend, and a flood of dread rushes me as I think of that mystery abandoned campsite with the ripped tent and smashed cooler and cooktop. We have been camping since and have enjoyed the beauty of the Northwest, but there was something there at that place that possibly took or harmed someone else less than 300 feet away from where we camped, and we all have to thank our lucky stars. Guts was doing his thing so well that afternoon. Update from the original posting: Guts is no longer with us. He has journeyed into the next phase, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about him and how he saved us. He was a warrior, and his new brother Geronimo has his spirit. Thank you for watching the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Sorry for taking forever to upload this.